Hello again, everyone. For everybody that found me on my last video in my attempts to connect some of the recent work that the Florida Maquis has been doing with the Earth grid system into my own research and what I know with the expanding Earth theory, what could be going on with the buckyball structures that we discussed. You'll probably remember this. Well, I don't know why that didn't pop up right out of the gate. The buckyball structure that we talked about, which I actually now verbally need to correct myself. I got caught up with the Temple Mount octagon, and these are actually hexagons. I do realize I made that mistake in the last video. I put it in the description line, but anyway, that'll be familiar to anybody who watched the previous one. And today I'm just going to get back into a couple things. First, as the subject line describes, there's another tie to another field of study that the Florida Maquis is up to with the Ebola research that I believe I've stumbled upon that relates. And I'll show that at the end of the video, but for those that did want me to continue this, I wanted to close out where I was going with the expanding Earth theory and close out what I was talking about regarding Samuel Warren Carey, his theories, and then also another scientist by the name of Alan Cox, who was starting to get more into this side of things from the geomagnetic pole reversal perspective and how that might play into these processes. So you guys might remember I had started to talk about the ridge lines being stretch marks in the oceanic structures, both in the Pacific and Atlantic mainly. I want to show how that correlates with Alan Cox, and I also want to show a video of sorts that describes the process by which the plate tectonics in a more drifting apart sense actually works, rather than the subduction zones that we're used to learning about in school. So again, I gotta thank Florida Maquis for everything that he's provided. He's posted some awesome stuff just in the last couple days on the Ark of the Covenant location. I do really want this work to resonate with anybody who might pick it up from where he's piecing things together. And sure enough, if this gets back around to him to kind of tie in some of the stuff that we're going to go into here, that would be awesome. So here's hopes to that. Anyway, to come back to the concept I'd begun to talk about with Samuel Warren Carey last time, and then the combination of Cliff High's information that he's given recently on how the solar forcing occurs in the plasmic core of the center. You can remember in the animation, A is about 200 million years ago, as the Earth's size would indicate, and as it grew out, you can see in the accompanying B and C graphics here that over time, the land mass, because of the larger surface area that the Earth needs to grow to along the geometric structure of should I say fractally scaling the buckyball formation here along those grid patterns, what you get is land masses with, sure enough, mountains. And this is something, of course, in the subduction world that is taught is, if you look at the typical subduction model in school, they say that these volcanoes here would be formed by the subduction zone. And you can even see over here in their own graphical work, you can find this at actually Britannica.com as they're referencing basically the textbook quality graphics that you'll find out there. You'll even see these stretch marks even paneled out in their own graphics. You see the wrinkles. They just, to my belief and what my understanding is, following Samuel Warren Carey's work, is that this is the false model, and rather that the spreading apart is the only thing that you get. And the mystery then, how do mountains form, is solved by this wrinkling effect. So without kind of further ado, I'm going to go just kind of play this video for you. This is, of course, a balloon that has some mud overlaid on the top of it, which, as this the underlying structure, its pressure zone increases, the landmass on top, of course, fractures to accompany for the necessary scaling that has to occur. And to me, when this grows, what I see is similar to the graphics that we're looking at on the slides there. Malaysia, the islands that form off the coast of India, Sri Lanka, that is. And you start to see almost like this almost looks like Greenland, right? You start to get this very natural fracturing effect, and sure enough, where the matter comes in to fill in is the new water that's created through the process. You can just visualize it there. So this is, of course, a page you can go to look at Alan Cox's research. What he had kind of studied, and what we can go into in later videos, is that this is actually brought on by the geomagnetic field polarity, the magnetism of the toroidal field around the planet, and its varying degrees of swapping of polarity. And of course, this happens on a cosmic time scale, as a lot of other researchers like Randall Carlson get into, kind of on an every 12,000 year cycle, which starts to get into when Atlantis sunk into the ground and might be rising again. Of course, with Edgar Cayce's research. These are all different things that kind of tie into this. I just wanted to give everybody yet another kind of reference point to look into if you wanted to go down some rabbit holes yourself, and maybe we can dive into any and all of those. Edgar Cayce's a fun one to get into as well. But before we leave this topic and then go into the other mention that I had in the title, I just kind of wanted to wrap this up and recall and bring everybody back to this graphic here, the Merkava structure, and remember how that on the Earth's grid system, that each one of these points represents one of these major nodes on the Earth grid. If I can just bring this picture back up, there we go. Okay, so here's the Merkava structure, the 3 points. If you can match it up to, all my photos are closing here. Sorry about this. So we're just going to bring up the 2 photos again, I guess. Okay, now we're back in business. So the 2 tetrahedrons put together, of course, as we identified with the Star of David, and one of those points actually, as we were talking about, meets out here in the Pacific Ocean, right where Hawaii's at. And I don't know if you guys recall last summer, or in last May essentially, the Kilauea volcano eruptions that had occurred. And if you want to come to this is actually a CNN article that just shows kind of the devastation in pictures, of course. It's kind of a video biography of this. But the devastation was immense, and it just didn't stop. And all of this is, here's the affected area, all of the devastation that occurred in the neighborhoods along the ocean side there. And what I am basically bringing for everyone to consider is that because of Hawaii being one of these expansion points, this pentagonal structure around here, and the Earth fractally expanding, that you were getting immense energy coming up out of these zones. And so just like energy coming out from a volcano erupting might be able to be harnessed, I imagine even all of these little singular nodes are very contested hotspots among those that know what they're there for. So anyway, look at this is kind of that, just the fissure that came out right on the Merkava point. It's incredible. If there's some more research you guys can do, I want to turn you on to another site, suspiciousobservers.org. And this is Ben Davidson's work, and it goes a little bit further into the pole flip scenarios. Full disclosure, he's not into, at least I have never seen him talk about the expanding Earth model. I don't know if he researches that in particular, but there's a ton you can find out from his site. It's in fact, this latest film series he did is great for educating yourself on the climate forcing, especially as it relates to what we're talking about with expansion. Anyway, that kind of wraps up the expanding Earth stuff for now. I wanted to quickly get into another reason why I did this video, because I've never seen Florida Maquis go to this site or reference it anyway. And I followed this for some time, and it's essentially a site that catalogs press releases, news stories of new military equipment and announced technology. And I follow this to kind of keep trends along the lines of what kinds of stuff are they disclosing and not disclosing versus the secret space program stuff that's starting to come out. And I'm convinced one of these days we're going to see the TR-3B up here and all that kind of stuff. But what's more curious, and what goes into his Ebola research, in fact, is if you come down here, this is deagel.com, DEAGEL.com, and you come down here to this countries link, and you click on this countries link, and what you get is 2017 census data, basically, for ranking of the world's superpowers, essentially. And I don't think any of this would be in dispute. You get a total aggregate number of countries up here at the top, and you get some other information like their gross GDP and per capita numbers for those GDPs. But mainly what we're tracking here is gross domestic product and the overall population of the United States. Now this is what you get when you hit that country's link when you first come to the site. But curiously, they also have a year 2025 forecast up here that when you click on it, takes you to a different view. And a couple things change here right off the gate. 183 countries now exist instead of 209 per their forecast. So 6 years from now, this is now September 10th, 2019, we have, 36 fewer countries listed on the overall list. I have not gone through this myself to figure out which countries those are. But what is really curious about this is the United States also drops to 6th on the list from first, and our population, how you read this, goes from 326 million down to 99 million. That's not a reduction of 99 million. How you're reading this statistic is that we will essentially lose 230 million thereabouts people based on their forecasts. And this is an interesting thing to note today. We have the bond markets completely selling off. There's September 11th is tomorrow. There are plenty of analysts out there that are saying the next collapse is looming. I don't know exactly how it's going to affect the United States going into these times, but this all has to tie into, I have to say, the geomagnetic reversal, the potential for an ice age that we find ourselves in, and the United States being particularly hit hard by it because of the lack of preparedness. All of this falls into that category, and of course, if you follow anything in the space, but that alone would not account for a drop in 230 million people in population. You know, the collapse of the economy, I have to say, with all of the people who are on life support and the are dependent on pharmaceuticals, you're going to lose a lot of people that way. But as may be expected, just to fast forward through to my point, down here in the bottom section, there's actually a disclaimer that these guys list. And this is where it gets real curious, because of course there's going to be some skepticism as to whether or not this data is correct, and they address all of it. Of course, they're saying they're getting all of the data that they're making not speculations, but rather surfacing these reports based on actual reports, based on real GDP numbers with the USG, the CIA, the IMF. So these are all numbers everybody can get. And they also come in here to make the argument that the books are being cooked already, which of course I don't think is really of any surprise to anybody who would come to this video. But this is where it ties into Florida Maquis' work, this entire paragraph. And since it's in pink, I'm just going to highlight it and read this for you, because if anybody's familiar enough with his channel for the last year or so, he's been following quite the story around Ebola epidemics as well. So it says, despite the numeric data quantity, there is a quality model which is not a direct translation into the numeric data. The 2014 strain of Ebola has a death rate of 50 to 60%, But to try and imagine what would happen if there's a pandemic of Ebola with hundreds of thousands or millions infected with the virus, so far few cases of Ebola infected people have enjoyed intensive health care with antiviral and breathing assistance, but above all, with abundant human support by physicians and nurses. Well, obviously because we've got the system that has not come apart yet, right? Anyway, back to the reading. In a pandemic scenario, that kind of healthcare won't be available for the overwhelming number of infected, leading to a dramatic increase of the death rate due to the lack of proper healthcare. The quality factor is that the death rate could increase to 80 to 90% in a pandemic in that scenario, from the stated 50 to 60% rate. The figure itself is not important, and what is relevant is rather the fact that the scenario can evolve beyond the initial conditions from 50% death toll to more than 90%. And really, the key point of what they're saying here is very valid. It's the potential for something like this to cause a scenario like what you would see here, but what exactly are they telling us? I mean, I have to imagine that to get this low, there's got to also be, as they also argue down here, a number of young people that just, as they did when the Soviet Union collapsed, just immigrate out of the country. So these aren't necessarily death numbers. These are simply population reduction numbers by means of immigration out, death, suicide. Probably plays a big role in an economic collapse scenario. But just the mention of the Ebola down here with this graphic, well, I let everybody kind of draw their own conclusions and come to this site, deagle.com. I'll leave all this stuff in the description line. And I'll leave it at that for now, too. Many more topics to come. Like, share, subscribe to my channel if this content's valuable to you. And we'll see you soon.